want to welcome everybody to the Waynesville Rotary Club meeting for the day.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, what a privilege it is to address you as our Father, to know ourselves as your children, your family, brothers and sisters. Good Father that you are, we know that you do not play favorites. You love us all, want what is best for us all, and will that we live together in harmony, seeking one another's good and coming to one another's aid. Thank you for Rotary, an organization that acknowledges that reality in creed and in practice. In a world where there are those who would divide us by the color of our skin, our level of income, our education, the community in which we live, the borders of our nation, or other such measures. Keep us reminded of and true to our creed, we pray, so that we shall contribute mightily to peace on earth and goodwill among persons everywhere. And Lord, we thank you for the little and not so little things that are part of who we are as Rotarians, such as the fellowship we're enjoying via Zoom and the good feeling that comes from the service projects in which we engage despite the COVID-19 pandemic. And we thank you for the good report given to us by President Steve about his children. And we pray for their continued well-being. We pray, Father, now for your presence and your guidance in this meeting. Amen.
John, you're our Sergeant at Arms this month?
We're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance from the Chick-fil-A in Noonan, Georgia. Me, my daughter, my wife, and my granddaughter. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you, John. Announcements. Our school pantry pounding for tomorrow. They had 13 people volunteer, and a number of us are doing multiple time slots. So if you want to come out in some nice weather and have a good time with us, filling up a school bus with food and things for the Hayward County School Pantry, there's still some opportunity. And you can either email me or raise your hand right now and I will put you down. Email me, because I don't see any hands. Most of you, a lot of you are already volunteered. We have had a request from the choral department at Tuscola. They're excited to try to get their students back in the classroom, but they are looking for some funding maybe to help some of their kids purchase resonance masks. These are masks that they're all built on a frame so that they can sing and breathe without ending up with a mask in their mouth or against their nose. The cost of them are $32.95 a piece. And there are 65 students, some of which would not really be able to afford that kind of expense. So is there anyone who would like to champion this effort to help the choral department obtain some of these masks? Or if you would like to personally sponsor a child or two, can we do that, Cecil?
Yes. I would, Mark's online, but my suggestion would be that the check go to the foundation so that you could get your tax benefits and it not go through the club, but we can go either way.
Okay. So if you want to make it a donation, write a check and send it to Mark. Mark, what's the foundation's mailing address?
It's the same as ours.
Okay.
I'll get it to him if it comes to our.
Okay. Very good. All righty. Cecil, do you have any announcements?
Steve, I'd have one more. Putting on your treasurer hat, we still have 9 people that, as of this past Tuesday, have not paid their dues for April through June. Everyone has been contacted by the members of the board and said that they would get that paid. So as of this past Tuesday, there's still 9 outstanding accounts, and we need to get that money in. If you're one of those 9, thank you, Steve.
All righty. And I've talked to 2 of those people this week. And again, the check's in the mail, I guess. But we'll find out. We'll get it done. Cecil, are you introducing the program today, or is John?
Hey, Steve, are we going to do Happy Dollars?
Happy Dollars. Yes.
Can I go first?
Jack? Yes, Jack.
I'm very happy that my good friend and senior citizen, Mary Ann Way, is celebrating her 90th birthday tomorrow. And I am so happy that I want to contribute $20 in her honor.
Good. Mary Ann, let's see if we can raise $90 for you today.
Mary Ann, you're muted.
This is Ron. I'll give $20 along with Jack in honor of my 3rd grade Sunday school teacher, who was she and her husband were wonderful mentors for me as a growing up young man in First United Methodist Church.
Thank you, Ron.
This is Paul Irvin. I'll give $20 in honor of her late husband, who was a fraternity brother of mine at Duke University, about 20 years ahead of me.
Diane and I will give $20 also in her honor as one of our dearest friends.
We're getting very close. I'll throw in the last $10 for Mary Ann and another 10 for the news that I gave you earlier today.
Mary Ann's desperately trying to figure out.
I know. Am I on now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm overcome. Thank you all so much. I was going to say, I'll give $20 because I'm still upright and taking nourishment. And if I live till tomorrow, I'll be 90, but you all know that, all my dear friends, and I appreciate more than you know this honor that you all have done by donating $20. Thank you so much.
Very good. Rich, you have to unmute yourself, Rich.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Mary Ann, happy birthday.
Thank you.
You know, my cowboy friends say that birthdays don't bother him anymore, but the ones with zeros get his attention. So happy birthday to you, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would like to contribute $5 happy dollars. I have several things to be happy for in addition to Mary Ann's birthday tomorrow. Wife Kathy is still in the Pensacola area. Her father is still with us, so prayers and positive thoughts are working. And they survived Sally without any great damage to the house. In fact, no damage to the house. Lots of yard cleanup, that everybody is well. So we're very thankful for that.
Good day.
George Thompson's trying to get in.
Well, every year, Mary Ann conducts her last European river cruise. And I wanted to put in $20 in honor of Mary Ann's last river cruise, and with the hope that it will continue the tradition in the years to come.
Thank you, George.
Anybody else with happy dollars? Very good. This is a banner day for happy dollars, and it shows the great respect and love we have for Mary Ann. So it's a beautiful day tomorrow for her birthday. Now, John, I think, indicated he is going to introduce our program. Cecil, did you have some additional information on our speaker?
No, I'll leave that to John.
Okay. John, it's yours.
Thank you, Steve. I will say that 13 years ago, having moved into this wonderful community, everybody has fallen in love with Cataloochee and the elk, but I particularly, along with most everyone else, fell in love with the history. I reflect back, as I told Wayne earlier today, that I used to sit next to Raymond intentionally to pick his brain on some of the history of being up there. And you could only ask so many questions at a time, so you had to stretch it out. Then I became a friend of Steve Woody, and had been out to his house, and so I'm particularly excited, having just finished reading Wayne's second novel, Requiem by Fire, and looking for speakers. I said, boy, wouldn't it be great if I could get Wayne to come. And now, by the technology of Zoom, I can not only be in Noonan, Georgia right now to introduce him, but we can have him join us today. So I'm very excited. Most of you folks probably have read Cataloochee and Requiem by Fire, but if you haven't, it's a great opportunity to pick up the history of the Cataloochee Valley from his perspective. Most of you know Wayne lives in Asheville and was born in Asheville, North Carolina. He went and was educated in the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Appalachian State University, and Duke University, so he covers a lot of bases. He began writing fiction in late 1990s, and he's published 4 short stories and a poem, and won 2 short story prizes. His novels, as I said, include Cataloochee and Requiem by Fire. He lives near Asheville with his wife, Mary, at least if it's current, Wayne, from your back cover of your book that I'm reading this from. But he also is the author, he wrote Cataloochee in 2007, and he wrote Requiem by Fire in 2010, and I guess it was reprinted in 2020. His Woodsmoke, a volume of poems, is to be published in early 2021. He's won the Thomas Wolfe Memorial Literary Award from the WNC Historical Association and the James Still Award from the Fellowship of Southern Writers. I couldn't be any more excited about a speaker than I am having Wayne share whatever he wants to about the books, read us a poem, whatever he'd like to do, but we're glad to have you, Wayne. Thank you for joining us today.
Don, I'm glad to be here. And here for me is in Madison County. I'm in Hot Springs on River Road. I'm overlooking the French Broad River, which is full and muddy right now. And we're just kind of keeping an eye on it. I think it's going back down. I hope so. My cousin Raymond Caldwell has been noted a couple of times here today, and I just want to give him a shout out wherever he is right now. Because I don't think I could have done nearly as good a job with Cataloochee if I hadn't known Raymond. As those of you who knew him know, he was a hiker and he was a talker. And he and I walked a lot of trails in Cataloochee And he would have that picture book of his under his arm, and he would show me, so Aunt such and such lived over here, Uncle such and such lived over here, and here's a good story for you, and that kind of thing. And I went to the Cataloochee reunion in 2007. I don't know, this would have been, yeah, it would have been 2007, the year Cataloochee was published. And I saw Raymond over there by a table, and I went over and started talking to him. He said, Wayne, I want to tell you something. He said, you got it right. And that was better criticism to me than anybody could have done in the New York Times or the Asheville Citizen or wherever. To get that kind of affirmation from him was really a treat. So one of these days, maybe I'll dedicate a book to him. Haven't gotten around to that yet. I do have family connections to Haywood, although I was born in Asheville. I was born into the Caldwell family. My grandfather, Jerry, was born in Cataloochee. My father, Troy, was born on Jonathan's Creek, very close to the Shady Grove Church. I share his name. Troy is my middle name, and we are named after Troy Leatherwood, who was our uncle, who lived very close to Shady Grove there. Some of you probably know. I see a Leatherwood lurking here in the membership, and we're probably kin somehow. My grandmother was Dare Leatherwood, who was Medford and Troy and those guys' sister. So I go way back. Now, I have to tell you that I'm adopted, and that'll come up a little bit later. So maybe I don't have all that connection anyway, but then when I found my birth parents and got to checking on that, I'm related to every Sutton in Haywood County. And, you know, it just doesn't stop. I'm coming at you from both directions. I didn't really pay that much attention to my Haywood County roots until I left home, went to school, and, you know, there's something about being in college that makes you homesick. And then the second teaching job I got after college was in Schenectady, New York. And to spend 2 winters in Schenectady really makes you homesick. We were there in 74, 75, and 75, 76, and those were 2 of the worst winters on record up there in the Mohawk Valley. So we kind of had to come back, and I'm really glad we did. When I was in high school, I had a teacher named Laura Harrell, and I think it was in 10th grade. I was 14 or somewhere around that age. She made me read Look Homeward, Angel. And that was, I guess, what you'd call a transformative experience for me. I knew Asheville, of course, and I knew what he was writing about, at least as much as a 14-year-old kid could. And I thought to myself, what a neat thing to do. I would love to be able to do something like that. But, you know, when you're 14 and you're relatively well-adjusted, you don't have a whole lot to write about. So I kind of put that in the back of my head, and I went to school and I taught, and came back to Asheville, and went into my wife's family furniture business in downtown Asheville. And there's something about a PhD in English, trying to learn accounting, that sort of takes up all your time. And it was, I didn't really come back to the idea of writing until the year I turned 50. And I got into that. I wrote a couple of short stories. They won prizes. I kept writing sketches and stories, and pretty soon I saw, you know, that person's related to this person, and this person's going to marry that person. And pretty soon I had something that looked like a novel. And I put all this stuff together. This would have been about 2003. And I had a typescript that was nearly 900 pages. And I didn't have any better sense than to think I could sell something like that. Stephen King, yeah, he can do that. John Irving, yeah, he can do that. Wayne Caldwell, no, who's ever heard of Wayne Caldwell? So I cut it on Lee Smith's advice. Some of you probably know Lee's work. And got it down to about 600 pages. And Lee said, well, I don't know, but I've got there's a young woman in my agency who may want to look at that. So I gave it to Lee, and she gave it to her friend. And I get this call one morning, from the agent in New York. She said, I think I've sold your book. I think I've got you a 2-book contract from Random House. Does that sound good? And, you know, that's kind of like walking into Yankee Stadium on your first at-bat and hitting a home run. It was just, oh yeah, sure, let's do this. So that's the genesis of these 2 books, Catalucci and Requiem by Fire. Catalucci is still in print, and I'm very proud of that. The first novel still in print after 13 years, that's almost unheard of, but there you go. Requiem was published in 2010 in hardcover. And if you remember what was happening in 2008, 2009, 2010, it wasn't real good. And the deal was they would publish the hardcover in 10, and then in 2011, they would publish a trade paperback. Well, nobody in 2010 was paying $26 for a hardcover book, although it sold about 5,000 copies. But then Random House said, no, we're going to cut you loose. We're not going to do the paperback. And I'm very proud to say that sometime this fall, Malaprop's bookstore in Asheville is going to reissue Requiem by Fire in a trade paperback. I don't have cover art for it yet, or I'd show you some, but I think it's going to be out probably in October, and be on the lookout for that. If you missed it the first time around, you're going to get a do-over on that, so that would be very good. I want to read to you a little bit today from Catalucci. I want to read to you a little bit from Requiem, and I want to read you 2 or 3 poems out of my new collection called Woodsmoke, which is going to be issued by Blair Publishing in Durham in February. And I did get cover art for that today, but I don't know how to show that to you off my computer, so I'm a little non-functional about that. But I did want you to get a little bit of the flavor of me reading from this. And then I just want to open it and say, are there any questions? And if there aren't, then we're done. And if there are, we'll just be here all afternoon because I like to talk about this stuff. This is from the prologue to Catalucci. Jake Carter was far from dark-minded, but had inherited a streak of what his mother called worriment, along with her conviction that while a body ought not hunt for trouble, nonetheless he should be watchful, for woe walks up and down in the world. It was 1928, the first day of October, the time of year yellow jackets turn ill. Nearly ready for winter, apples and beef cattle sold, firewood stacked in the dry, yet weather too warm to kill hogs. The in-between, the time when man thinks he deserves some rest, but woman knows none awaits. At breakfast, his wife Rachel pointed him to chores for which he had little relish. But, urged on by her and 2 cups of bitter coffee that spurred a hasty trip to the outhouse, he produced bushel baskets, shovel, and rake from the barnside shed and made for the kitchen garden. He spent most of the day there, harvesting tomatoes and peppers against imminent killing frost, turning rich earth, dropping writhing night crawlers into a mason jar for fish bait, and sowing everything save the greens patch in winter rye to be spaded under come spring. Although trees had yet to shed in earnest, he eyeballed the roof, combed the valley for accumulated dry leaves, perfect tinder for a house fire. Spying a small collection of sourwood leaves over the front room, he went to the shed for his ladder, fashioned years ago from 2 straight locust limbs for uprights and leftover chestnut for rungs, the knots on which were worn smooth as old bronze. Then he figured he might as well fix the shed roof while he was there. A piece of misshapen metal had sprung from its moorings in a storm, and he hadn't gotten around to fastening it back. He pocketed nails and hung a claw hammer in the loop on the leg of his overalls, grabbed the ladder like a man might take a child by the shoulders to get its attention, and worked the base into the ground. Up 3 rungs, he laid hammer on roof and leaned toward the wayward metal, which curled toward the sun. As he pulled, he smelled rain in the southern breeze. The galvanized steel popped and cracked, and he needed to rise 1 more rung to reach high enough to pull it flush with the roof, tuck it underneath its neighboring sheet of metal, and nail them fast. But as he stepped up, a gunshot cracked in the autumn air, which nearly cost him his footing. Steadying himself, Jake took off his glasses, as if that would help him hear better. The fire came from either his nephew Zeb's place, which joined him a half-mile down the mountain on the northeast, or Ezra Banks's farm, which joined him on the southeast. 4 o'clock by the sun. He put his glasses back on. Ezra Banks was Jake's brother-in-law, married 48 years to his sister Hannah. Their oldest son, Zeb, was a quiet man whose lot in life was to live within sight of his father and near his 3 brothers, none of whom got along. Last night, in fact, Jake had heard Ezra and Zeb returning from Big Cataloochee, arguing like a pair of sore-tailed cats. After a minute, another shot carried up the hollow. Grabbing his hammer, he moved the ladder enough to make it list to the right, then rock from side to side until he steadied it. He was about to descend when he heard 4 more reports. He raised fingers to count. 6 shots. 1, then silence about the space of a minute, then another, then 4 in slow but steady succession. These final 4 came from the same weapon. The fire seemed deliberately paced, like a man on the midway carefully trying to win a Cupid doll for his lady. The wrong hoodie hurt his foot soles, so he shifted them on the ladder. Only noises of birds and breeze now. He pushed the errant piece of sheet metal under his neighbor and nailed both to the sheathing. No one ought to be shooting down there, at least not in such a pattern. Killing a varmint took 1 shot, 2 or 3 at most for a bear. Folks shot into the air Christmas Day, but it was only October. Someone could have been sighting in a rifle, but Ezra was too chinchy to buy a new one, and Zeb was no hunter. Damn, he said, I reckon me and Lily ought to head down that way. As he saddled the mule, he figured the .38 Owlhead pistol Ezra kept in his desk drawer likely made the first 2 shots, but the others were from something else, a rifle maybe. No cannon like Ezra's ancient .52 caliber Sharps, but bigger than a .22, or perhaps the breeze twisted and he'd heard 6 shots from the same weapon. Uneasy business either way. Hope ain't nobody hurt, he prayed. But if somebody got shot, Lord, let it be Ezra. And Lord Jesus, if it is Ezra, let him be killed dead. A bedridden Ezra Banks would be cause for the whole of Little Cataloochee to up and move. Don't reckon even Sis would put up with that. I was writing a standard sort of family historical novel about Cataloochee, and I was about 3 or 4 chapters into it, and this Ezra Banks character walked in and sat down and said hello. And I'm really glad he did, because he became the central character in the book. I had no idea he was coming. I've heard other writers talk about watching their characters do things, listening to them talk, and I always thought that was sort of like mental illness. But it's really how this process happens. And you think you're going to make your character do something, and you start bending, and you just paint yourself into a corner. The prose doesn't work. It doesn't sound good. But if you let them have their way, then it'll be all right. One of you mentioned a while ago a fellow named Steve Woody. Steve and I became friends, I guess 20, 25 years ago. His wife, Mary Bruce, and I were on the Habitat Board together, and that's how come we got to know each other. But he lent me his grandfather for Requiem by Fire. If you've ever been to the Woody house in Cataloochee, that's where Uncle Steve, as we call him, lived, because the Caldwell family and the Woody family intermarried with one another a lot back in the old days. And my character Silas Wright in Requiem is kind of based on my concept of old Steve Woody. And the young Steve Woody, I think the young Steve just turned 80, I believe it is. He thinks I got it pretty much right too. This is old Silas meditating on what's happening as the park is beginning to take Cataloochee over. It's hell to get old, 80. Aches and pains in places I didn't even know I had 2 years ago, or to sit and stare at the mountains till dinner time. I miss the chestnuts. Their yellow was prettier than maples or tulip trees, and big lordy, them was trees God was proud of. Man could build anything out of them. Now they're gone. Used to see them yellow-headed parakeets. Gone. Pigeons, flocks used to hide the sun. Gone. Me too, soon enough. Wonder how gone will feel. He leaned against the rail and shut his eyes. 5 minutes later, he jerked awake. What the hell am I doing? Only a Rockefeller can afford to nap away a morning. So he's got a cabbage trench, and he's putting some cabbage away for the winter, and one thing or another happens. Later that afternoon, he rode to Nellie to find no mail, which lately suited him. No meddling government that day. He took his time returning, sitting the horse halfway home to watch yellow jackets line into the roadside. He dismounted and, tiptoeing, tied a piece of shirt tail to the overarching dog hobble to help him find the nest hole toward dark. Wonder if I need one of them permits to burn these things out. Damn government. The way we're headed, Washington will take a notion to breed the damn things. The tourists will get stung so bad, some peckerhead bureaucrat will say that was so good, let's restock rattlesnakes. Next thing you know, they'll bring in packs of wolves. Hell, I remember my daddy talking about getting a $10 bounty for a wolf pelt. They'll end up bringing back beavers. Elk. I'd not be surprised by it. Silas cocked his head toward a keening hawk, but the bird had outraced his hearing. His eyes lit on a crow preening on a sourwood limb, backlit by the setting sun. He tipped his hat to the bird, clucked at the mare, and headed slowly homeward. The creek beside the road was barely 6 feet wide. He stopped often to read its rushing water. As a boy, I used to catch specks barehanded, dots and lines on their sides like God's handwriting, long as your forearm, holding in pools, waiting for whatever darted by. Rising mayflies, falling ants, bees, crickets. I found half-digested mice in their stomachs. Kind of like a bear. They'll eat about anything. Ain't seen such trout in years. They was fished out of this stretch of creek by the turn of the century. Now it's hatchery fish, rainbows, browns, easy catches. They think when a man shows up, food falls from the sky. The Hawkins boy said we can't fish with worms. Hell far. Cart me to the clink if they like. I want trout for supper. And he goes on. You know, when the park took over, there were certain restrictions that the people who decided to stay had to abide by. And one of them was hunting in season, and another one was no natural bait for fishing. And people just couldn't figure out why that was so important to the Park Service, but it was. And then there were people like old Silas who said, well, you know, this here park's 500,000 acres, and they ain't got 4 or 5 rangers. They ain't gonna catch me doing nothing unless I just want them to. So there were some people who stayed when the park took over and decided they'd play that little game with the government. Let's see how much I can get by with. Because another thing you couldn't do was cut firewood. You could do deadfall limbs, but you couldn't cut green trees. And that was kind of a pain. And then you couldn't possess, make, or sell whiskey. Well, that's Cataloochee. You're not going to enforce anything like that over there. But then they tell you can't pasture your cattle on the high mountain anymore in the summers, and you can't break new ground, and you can't do this, that, and the other. And pretty soon, it got to be like the Alexander family. They had the Cataloochee Ranch down in Cataloochee Valley at first, and they tell us for the truth that they tried their best to get along with the government, but I think it was about 1936 or 7, when the government said you got to keep your hunting dogs on a leash, they left. Went up on top of the mountain, and a lot of people go up to ski at Cataloochee and they think they've been to Cataloochee. But the Alexanders just kind of kept that name and sent it on up the mountain. And that afternoon, old Silas did get caught by Ranger Jim, but Jim didn't find any fishing worms in his jar, so he let him go at that point. And it turns out that toward the end of the book, they really the only two people left in Cataloochee are Ranger Jim and Old Silas. And it shows you from 1928 to 1934 how the population of the valley shrunk and how the way of life just ended. The historic Steve Woody stayed in Cataloochee by himself. I think he died in 1942 or 43, somewhere around in there. But it's a vanished world, and I'm just real happy that I've been able to record some of this, if nothing else, but for my grandchildren, who would otherwise probably have not known a thing in the world about this. I've been working on a novel for about 5 years now called Shadow Family. I have finished it. It's the story of 3 people, a birth mother, an adoptive mother, and their son, who brings them together in the end of the book. I mentioned earlier that I was adopted. So that's a book that I've been wanting to write for a long time. I have no earthly idea if anybody's going to want to publish it or not, but it's out at 2 publishers right now. Keep your fingers crossed about that. I think it's a pretty good story. But 2 or 3 years ago, while I was writing Shadow Family, an old man named Posey Green just sort of walked into my head and started talking. And there's that mental illness business again, but he did. And I started listening to him, and I finally come up with about 75 poems, mostly in his voice, about the area where I'm living right now on Pole Creek and Candler. And I want to read 2 or 3 short poems about that, and I'm going to quit talking and let you guys ask me some questions if you have some. You have to know about Posey that he's in his mid-80s. He still heats his home with wood that he cuts and stacks and splits himself. And he's got some pretty set opinions on how things ought to work in the world. He is not a churchgoer, but he knows his Bible, as they say around here, from lid to lid. And he's got some opinions about that too. So he's just an interesting old fellow. And my wife says that he sounds a lot like me, but whatever. This poem's called Tree Wood. My son, he used to say his grandpa talked like a hillbilly, which of course he was. I can hear my daddy yet praising his rifle gun, reading his Bible book, wanting to eat him some ham meat. Such talk never shamed me a bit, but I've got away from it. Oh, I speak of tree wood, but that just means bark on, not split firewood. I expect limb wood's more to the point, but I think a body knows what I mean. I don't worry about sounding like a hick, and anyhow, I'm a mite hungry for a can of tuna fish. Did you ever wonder why they call it tuna fish instead of just tuna? This one's called May 14th. The many years I've walked Pole Creek give me a right long view of things. So I know it's hotter than it used to be, stormier too, and you used to see them black-winged scarlet birds all summer. No more. Red wings is scarce, and when's the last time you seen a green snake? Chestnuts, gone. Hemlocks, dying. Enough to make a strong man cry. But still, within a day or two, one side or t'other of the Ides of May, blinking yellow flashlights start their twilight glow. Happened yesterday, right on time. Although every year fewer and fewer come, I reckon the way this world's going, when we run slap out of lightning bugs, we'll flat run out of hope. And then this one's called Firewood in Heaven. They're bound to have firewood in heaven. I bet it splits easy and straight, don't splinter, burns without being consumed, and don't smoke up the place. Down here, before thistles and sweat, Adam and Eve played in paradise, naked as a pair of plucked jaybirds. But after God set flaming swords there over east of Eden, they needed heat against what wasn't yet known as winter. I can hear them now, kind of like this. What's that I feel, Adam? I think I'll call it cold. What to do? More than clothes they give us, I reckon. Will it stay cold? Don't know. Might get colder. I sure am ashamed. Honey, it ain't your fault. I imagine right then Jesus stole a coal from heaven's heater and shot lightning at a gopher wood tree to give them folks fire. For warmth, for hot food, for revelation. Adam and Eve were human. And I don't know a body who won't search deep inside a fire, looking for both heat and spirit comfort, which they sorely needed. I got a notion our first parents' first fire still burns, a kind of ancestor flame really present in anything from my old heater to my neighbor's fancy foreign stove to them old-time Pentecost stones of fire. Every lick of flame a gift from God's fireplace. Any questions?
I do. This is Paul. Wayne, Mary Ann and I would appreciate you letting people know that you did get a PhD at Duke, I believe. Is that not right?
That's correct.
And did you teach before you went to New York at NC Central?
I taught for a year at North Carolina Central.
Great, wonderful. Now, the names of the book and the poetry book and when you expect they might come out, can you give us the names again?
The poetry book is called Woodsmoke.
Mm-hmm.
And it's coming out. The scheduled publication date is February 24th of 2000, whatever next year.
21, right?
Now, the publishing industry under COVID is like every other industry. It's ass over tea kettle. So I don't know if that's, firm, but that's what they're telling me. They told me today it was going to the printer tomorrow.
Okay, great. I don't guess you can go on a book tour. At least maybe you can do one virtually now, but maybe
Right.
soon you can. Thank you so much for being with us.
Glad to be here. Anyone else?
Can I speak? Wayne,
When you heard from Malaprops, had they seen, I assume they had seen some of your work before, but what, are they acting as a publisher or?
They are.
Oh, okay.
They have a division called Leaning Chair Press that has published so far, I think it's 3 books. One's called Naked Came the Leaf Peeper, which is what they call a progressive novel. I wrote, I think it was chapter 6 in it. There were 12 of us, and one of us started it, and it got passed to the next, and on like that. And then there are 2 small volumes of poetry. This is their first novel, and I'm just real happy that they decided to take a chance on this because they're a small press. They agreed to do this in probably January, and then the COVID hit, and they're trying to run a retail bookstore and all like that at the same time, and I'm just real happy they're still around. So if you don't have an intimate connection to Blue Ridge Books there in Waynesville, and I know Allison there, and those are great folks, have an intimate connection with Malaprops because we need to keep these independent bookstores open. But yeah, they were very receptive to it. They've known my work for a long time.
George?
yeah, I really appreciate you're very articulate and wonderful storyteller. Most of the fictional writers whose works really live on long after their life seem to have their stories relate to a bigger story. They're fabulous in telling a story, but you suddenly, at the end of the story, you suddenly realize that, hey, this wasn't just about Catalucci. This wasn't just about. It's more than that. And I see this certainly in the writings of Thomas Wolfe. You might have studied with Reynolds Price at Duke. His stories are that way. Gail Godwin, Ann Tyler, certainly Faulkner was excellent at this. I call it a sense of transcendence. I couldn't help but go. I can remember where I was when I read Look Homeward Angel. It had a similar impact upon me, but you might remember the opening line, some of the opening line. Each moment is the fruit of 40,000 years. The minute winning days like flies buzz home to death, and every moment is a window on all time. This is a moment. And then he goes on with his story.
Right.
You're all of a sudden you're just thinking, this is worth listening to. I got to know this story because it's related to me, and it's related to all time, and it's going to interpret something about my own life. My question is, do you start out with a sense of how is my story going to be related to a bigger story? How will what I write and how I write have an element of transcendence?
That is a very good question, and it's also a hard one to answer. I think I'm going to side with Ron Rash on this. And by the way, if you haven't read Ron, go out and do it this afternoon. Go. Don't hang around here with me. Ron and I both tend to start with a small image, something that is very localized and very specific. I remember one day I was trying to figure out where Catalucci was going, and I decided that Ezra Banks was going to hang a door. I'm no carpenter. I went to Dr. Google and I found out how to hang a door, and I wrote about that. And next thing I knew, I had 10 or 15 pages about this one guy hanging a door. Nobody wants to read that. And it came down to about maybe a half a paragraph in the published book. But that's sort of how I tend to look at these things. And I knew I wanted to write a story that was based on some stories out of my family. I wanted to write a story based on the national parks takeover of the land. Past that, I really didn't have anything transcendent on my mind. But it comes out in the end that I did have a story that talks about the human attachment to place and what happens to people when that attachment to place is ripped up and torn apart. And I think that's a pretty universal thing.
Yes.
Because it happens to all of us, whether it has to do with a place that's 5 acres of dirt or whether it has
Mark,
a place where
Nicole, Gary on line 1.
So, yeah, I don't start out with an outline. I don't start out with a vision that says this is going to be a book that's going to change the history of the world. I just start out with something small and see what happens.
Yeah, you do it well, and thank you. I was a pastor of Raymond Caldwell and spent many of an hour with him talking about a place that was abused, and it was home, and he had to leave home, and he never got over it.
Right.
He went through his death and grief. It was all about human grief, and anything you write about those stories about Catalucci have to do with the universal experience of the grief of losing home.
Yeah, Raymond's father actually it killed him.
Yep. Raymond never got over it, but
Right.
for good reasons, and he was a lovely man.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for writing what you've done.
You're welcome.
So Wayne, if I understand, Silas is Steve Woody's grandfather. At least you took some things from Steve Woody's grandfather to make that character. That kind of implies that Steve Woody's grandfather may have had something to do with that top secret church fire. School fire. And I'd love to give Steve Woody a hard time. Can you confirm or deny that?
It's my understanding that there were some Caldwells involved in that school fire, and there were some Woodies and probably some Hannahs and maybe some other folk. And they had this pact that says, the last one of us alive can tell the story. And as I understood it, Uncle Steve Woody was the last one alive. And he got to tell, and this is the beautiful thing about being the survivor, you get to tell the history. So there are probably at least 5 or 6 versions of the school fire in Cataloochee. And I really do like the one that Uncle Steve told. So that's the one I've told in the book.
I want to thank you so much for doing this. This was an exceptional program, and I hope everybody gets out and
Yeah, there, hold it up right. There you go.
here we go. That's it. And I just finished, actually read Requiem by Fire about a month ago, and then I just finished Ron Rash's new book. And that he has that woman that is tough as nails is just intriguing. And, but within all that intrigue and drama and fiction is a little bit of what I've garnered from friends that understand what the timber business came to play, not only in the park being formed, but what it was like to work in that kind of environment. It's just intriguing to me. And I catch myself fantasizing living in those days, particularly after a day of 3 or 4 hours of Zoom meetings, what it would be like to be outside doing work until you get to healthcare. And that's what catches you right there.
John, you're going in and out on me on the audio, so I'm not sure whether you're asking me a question or not.
Try it again. The fantasy of living in those days catches us mostly when we think of what it would be like to not have the health care we have today.
Okay.
I just can't imagine what it would be like to see so many of your children not make it. I've had torn rotator cuffs, and undoubtedly I'd be a crippled man if I were living in those days. So, but thank you so much for coming. It was a wonderful program, and I can't wait till your book comes out on the poetry, and we'll get that.
Okay, great. And, you know, if you want me back, you know how to get in touch with me.
I sure do. Thank you again.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, Wayne. We've had a wonderful program with you today. And the stories you tell are the stories about the place that we love to live. So good job. And I expect that you'll have some more book sales out of this group before the week's over. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Wayne, I have a question for Wayne.
Yeah.
Did Raymond ever share with you the story of his one and only Harley Davidson ride?
You know, I expect he did, but I'm not remembering it. Why don't you give it to us?
He shared this with me a while back, knowing that my wife and I rode. And I don't know exactly how old he was, but certainly a younger man. I don't know if it's his Harley or a borrowed one, but he'd ridden it over to Waynesville for the evening and decided it's time to go back to the house. And I was going out the road it's the old road out of town that goes by what's now Junaluska Elementary School, and got out there just about where the curve is. And it was, of course, gravel at that point. And something went wayward, and he came off the Harley, landed in the gravel, but the Harley kept going. And it went on down the road a little ways, and he said he was sitting there watching it, and all of a sudden it kind of fell over and turned around and stood back up and came at him trying to run over him. He said, "Never again will I get on a Harley Davidson motorcycle."
That sounds like Raymond. Yep.
I also knew his brother J.R. Caldwell and bought a vehicle from him back when he had his sales lot. Anything else for the good of Rotary?
Yes, Steve.
I'd like to
Mark
share,
Baumgarten.
I'd like to share this one little story about Raymond. But Raymond was in my Sunday school class, a class that I taught some. And I had a little different take on his what George had to say. I asked him one day what it was like to have been forced out of Cataloochee. He said, "Well, it was tough for folks, but I was only about 7 years old at the time, he said, and he said it didn't affect me as much as it did others. And he said, really, it was for the good because there were only about a half a dozen families out there, and they were all intermarrying, cousins marrying cousins. He said, there's no telling us what we would have been today if we'd continued living out there.
Yeah, Raymond could give you an earful.
Yeah. President Steve, Mark Bumgarner here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to make note that this coming Thursday, we'll be having open door again, volunteer opportunity for engagement. I'll be sending out an email, and hopefully we'll have at least 4 good volunteers to help us out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. There's nothing else for the good of Rotary. Cecil, can you stay online for a few minutes?
Yes.
The rest of you, have a good weekend, and we will see you next week.